All right, so we're back for another episode of Closed. I have Ross Wallenstein with me, who is a well-experienced public affairs and communication strategist with over 25 years of experience spanning government, politics, and media relations. He's the founder and CEO of Wall2Wall Communications, which is a firm he launched in 2021, and he provides strategic communications, public affairs, consulting, and some thought leadership counsel to corporations, nonprofits, and to political campaigns. Then before starting his agency, Ross had senior roles with some major companies, including managing outreach for some McDonald's franchisees, among others, across New York State. His career includes extensive work in New York State and federal government, serving in communication roles for governors and members of Congress. He's been recognized on multiple city and state in politics and why powerless, and is a frequent contributor to major news outlets. I hope I didn't forget anything. Ross, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. That was great.
It's the longer the intro, the tougher it is to jam it all in, but it's all going to come out in conversation.
When you say 25 years, even though I know that's true, it sounds ridiculous, but it's totally true.
No, I'm right there with you. I think back now to I'm hitting the 20-year mark of coming out of law school, and I don't know where it went, but that's a good place to start, is like career path.
Yeah.
Because, it's 25 years in. Let's talk about what ultimately, let's fast forward to Wall2Wall Communications, because we went through the backstory a little bit, but what prompted you to start that?
So I had, like you said, I had worked in a variety of, I worked in government, I worked on campaigns, I worked for communications firms, I did corporate communications. Like you said, I represented top 100 companies, Fortune 100 companies like McDonald's, where I worked with franchisees and the corporation in terms of public affairs outreach and stakeholder campaigns, and dealing with the plethora of alphabet agencies and chambers of commerce, et cetera, for the franchisees here in New York. And then I was at another firm during COVID. And kind of just decided at a certain point that I didn't want to, I had developed enough of a Rolodex. And when I say Rolodex, it dates me a little bit, but I had developed enough of a Rolodex.
I'm there with you again.
Yeah, it's starting your own business. I don't think it's something I could have done at 30, but at 40, two, I had enough contacts in business and communications, in the media, and frankly, potential lines of business, potential clients that I could go to and say, hey, I'm doing this for myself. Can you throw me some work? Do you need any help? Can I be helpful in A, B, C, and D, whatever it is? It was just the point in my career where I was kind of in between something, and I had worked on a campaign again, and then I just didn't want to do it for another person when I could reach out and I know how to do the work, right? So the other piece of it, when you work for a firm, whether it's a law firm, a real estate firm, a communications firm, it's just going out and conducting the business development pieces of it.
You had the moment.
Yeah.
Right? That's, I could definitely relate to that. You had that moment. And I guess, did you had a partner ever, or you just solo your whole career? Yep.
It's funny. I didn't ever think about starting the business with someone else, only because when you have a partner, you have to split the fee. So it never occurred to me. I did have a conversation once with a friend of mine who's an attorney. He does a lot of entertainment and IP stuff. And he said to me, he started his own practice maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I said, why did you do it with another person? And he said, because I want to be able to take my kids on vacation.
Yeah.
Which didn't occur to me until I went on vacation with my wife and my kids, and we were overseas. And I was like, oh, wait, if the phone rings,
right,
and it's 3 a.m. where I am, what do I do?
Yep. Now, I could definitely relate to that, because the first year that I was solo for a year, and actually we're coming up on 10 years now that my partner Lee Bergstein, we formed Bergstein Flynn, and yeah, for the first time, he didn't get to experience that part, just being totally solo. But I remember he got married a little bit after that, and I was covering for both of us. And he kind of came back from his honeymoon and said, yeah, I don't know how I would have done this if it was just me. And it's like, it's wild. But you do get to you make it your own much more so when you're solo. So
Well, but some of that is the work doesn't stop, right? Like,
yes.
you can't tell a client, I'm going away for, 4 days and I'm not reachable. You have to figure out a way to be reachable. And obviously, some of the work can wait, 2 or 3 days, but some of it, crisis communications and public affairs work and some of that stuff doesn't care that you're on vacation. And, when I worked with, for example, McDonald's franchisees in the city, we did some of the crisis work and some of the, you know, standalone communications work on behalf of the franchisees in New York City. And every Friday night for like literally 6 months, there was some incident at a McDonald's in Times Square, Herald Square, Uptown, Brooklyn, wherever it was, where there was something and they were like, 9 o'clock at night, we'd have to draft a statement on behalf of whoever owned that particular restaurant. And there was always something, and it was like clockwork every Friday night from like literally it was like 6 months, whereas literally every Friday night we would get a call saying, "Hey, something happened. Can you help and draft something and get it to whoever?"
It's funny because I think public relations, if you ask your average person off the street, like, do you know what public relations is as a field? They'd say, oh, yeah, of course, easy question. But if you really ask them to describe it, they'd probably struggle and say, I don't know, you just, put on a public face. Like what goes into starting your own firm? How much of it is just crisis management and like preparing in advance and getting to know, like anticipating the types of crises that might come up?
I think it depends on the type of client, right? I think it's, at this point, public relations is such a broad spectrum of, media relations, thought leadership, public affairs, influencer outreach, marketing. How many people say to me, "Oh, you do PR? Oh, so you like place ads for people?" Right. And I'm like, I could, and I have, and I've written copy for radio ads and placed them in, stations on behalf of a campaign where it's like some kind of strategic, focused, operation that you're coming up with something with a goal in mind, but you're not, if you sell widgets and you say, I want you to be, write billboards for my widget company, like I'm probably not your guy. Like I could figure it out, but I'm probably not your guy for that, right?
You're not Don Draper.
Yeah,
mad as that.
But like public relations as a focus now is such a broad term, but I think it's only for the people in it. I think, like you said, people on the outside, if they know anything about PR, it's, oh, you write a press release and you talk to a reporter and try to get a story for such and such a company. But it's really broader than that. It's really coming up with a strategy. It's coming up with a focus of, tell me where you want to get to, and let's figure out a way that we can stay in the news when it's helpful, stay out of the news when it's helpful, manage crises as they come up, and really head towards whatever the company is, whatever their goal is. That's where we're trying to go to, where it's, there has to be something in mind where you say, I want to sell more condos, or I want to, people to buy more hamburgers, whatever it is. Like you have to work backwards from that almost.
Right. No, that makes total sense. And so you've had a pretty broad range of experiences leading up to it. What do you draw on the most? Or maybe there's no answer to that, but like what prepared you most for this role that you're in?
So, I think you mentioned I work in government. I worked in campaigns in New York City politics, and state politics. I worked for a member of Congress for a long time in Queens and Nassau County. And then I worked in the governor's office under Elliot Spitzer and David Patterson. And as I tell people, I worked for Governor Patterson so I can handle a crisis. I think time in government is training like no other training for a type of industry like PR or public affairs. I think it teaches you how to think on your feet, and it, there's so much incoming in government that when you get to a for-profit or a nonprofit organization outside of government, you're so used to, oh, I need that thing, but I need it in 15 minutes. And then it's like, reporters aren't banging down your door. Companies don't necessarily line up to meet with you, depending on the company. There's so little income. You have to be proactive, right? But the training in government is what kind of, like, you could be more trained and then do less, but you can't be less trained and do more,
That makes, yep. No, that
right?
makes total sense. And I had a feeling you were going to say that. Just knowing what I know.
Yeah.
And so we touched on how you've worked both in the federal government, congressman,
Yeah.
and in New York State. I think they probably both have very unique challenges. Let's start with New York State. Like what makes New York so particularly difficult or different to work in,
I mean, New York is, it shouldn't.
other than it just being New York?
I was going to say, nobody who's listening to this or in New York City or in the state of New York is going to dispute anything here. But I think, New York is New York, and it's not, with apologies to the other 49 states and the District of Columbia, New York is its own particular animal. Um, the convergence of industries that are here, the fact that so much of the population is south of, let's say Rockland County, right? I think it's way more than half at this point is south of Rockland County, and then there's, what, 57 other counties that are north of that. But if you're like, I worked in the governor's office, the governor of New York can't just be the governor of New York City and Long Island and Westchester. It's the governor of, Utica and Buffalo and Syracuse and Rochester, whatever. So, it's a big state. There's 19 million people, something like that. Or there was at some point. I think there still is. I think it's, it's a big state. It's a diverse state. The politics in Suffolk County are not the same as the politics in Broome County or Orange County or whatever. And I think, it's a tough state to manage. I'm reading the Ron Chernow Hamilton book, and just in terms of like the managing the politics of different constituencies like that, it's something that the founders kind of like, I don't know if they thought through the size and scope of certain places, but New York was a big state when it was drawn, and somebody should have been like, hey, that looks too big on a map.
Yes.
Maybe we should cut that in half.
Yeah. No, so it's so funny. It's been a while. I read Chernow's Hamilton also, probably 6 or 7 years ago at this point. But I remember not thinking, like, there's only so much that could be in the play, and it was all adapted for that. But he really gets into like some of the original conflicts. Upstate, the Albany area is still a lot of Dutch and like old New York before it was New York. And then New York City itself.
It wasn't old then. It was just there.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
It was just there. Right.
No, but those guys, I mean, at that point, the Schuyler's and all them, they were there for 100 years.
Yeah, the Rensselaers and all these areas that, like, that's the capital region, very different interests from New York City. And then, they get into, obviously we all know that New York City itself was a stronghold for England when they took it over. So there's always been that dynamic here. And it's interesting that you brought that up, but and then in the federal government, I'm sure. Where were you first? Were you in New York State politics or federal? Okay, so that must have been an adjustment, also.
So I worked. Yeah, so I worked for. I mean, I worked for a member of Congress in Queens and Nassau County. He was on financial services. He was on international relations, and but as the congressman told me many times, protect home base, right? His constituents in Nassau County and Queens were more important to him than, financial services interests in South Dakota, because those people didn't vote for him. And he obviously had the work that he did in Washington, but he also was very cognizant of, the community group that needed help, with the sidewalk cleanup in Douglaston or whatever it was, right? Where it was so, Tip O'Neill used to say all politics is local. Tip O'Neill would be displeased now, because I think that switched around a little bit.
Yeah.
But if you're in it, I think that remains true. I think people are stuck with, the 700,000 or so people who got them there, and they try to remember them, or at least most of them do.
Yes.
And then I went from there to the state, which is, working in the federal government. I didn't give much thought to the state budget or who's getting funding for whatever, other than I was a taxpayer, but I was young and I didn't care. And then, you have to make that switch where you are working on behalf of the people of the state and, like I said, worrying about the other 61 counties outside of yours and trying to figure out how they all.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's it's difficult on both levels. I could see like right now, you mentioned how there's like a reversal almost in the local versus national. And without getting into a political debate here, because that's not the purpose of the show. Seeing some politicians, like we're both Nassau County guys. Recently, like Tom Schwazi, and he's run into some real difficulties with messaging and with his constituency because even though he's a Democrat, Nassau County was one of those few that remained Republican, and you've got this big, fairly complex bill that includes ICE funding that he supported. And, it blew back on him just because, something happened in Minnesota on the national level and everything is amplified and it's blowing back. And this local temple was giving a talk a couple of weeks ago. So I don't envy these guys that have to now walk that line and try to keep in mind what's best for their local constituents while also having to play, national
Yeah,
politics.
I mean,
It's pretty wild.
he was one of 7 Democrats to vote for the DHS funding bill. It's obviously something that he struggled with because he kind of tried to walk it back a few days later, and he's obviously worried about his reelection in 2026. Seems like he's going to go up against the same guy that he went up against 2 years ago. He only won by a couple of points, so he's probably pretty nervous. Although we don't have to debate that here, but I think the midterms are gonna he'll have the wind at his back a little bit. But it's a fight, and he knows that people in his district are concerned about, on either side, people are concerned about what's going on with ICE and the funding for it, and they kind of wish he had voted with the other members of the Democratic caucus instead of
Yeah.
picking that side of it and letting it go through.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's very interesting. And we've got Blakeman is sitting in Garden City right now, I think, getting the nod today from the Republicans. And he's drawing on that national messaging. And he's got these people traveling from those counties, Broome County, those upstate counties. They're coming to our hometown to, celebrate him. And it's going to be interesting. That's all.
Because all politics is not local anymore. All politics is national, and it trickles down to local instead of the other way around.
Yep. And I'm sure anybody that's listening that's not in New York and isn't recognizing these things right away, they're probably seeing similar signs.
Yeah, I mean it's I mean, look, we see it in at least the last 10 years, if not more. Um, you know, everything that and it's not a good way to conduct politics or business anymore. But everything is reactive. Everything is we're just responding to whatever, President Trump says or does or thinks or tells somebody else. And even when he wasn't in the White House for 4 years, the country, I still think, was responding to whatever was in his little head.
Yeah, the shelf life for news has just shrunk. I mean, I'm sure even just in your career, it's and I guess in some situations that might be helpful, right? Like I'm sure there are probably some times where you might say to a client, and I'm putting thoughts and words in
Yeah.
your mouth, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I would think, are there situations where something happens and the answer is, hold on, let's see if this lasts more than an afternoon.
Oh,
Social
totally. Yeah,
media
no, it's
blast.
but it's not even that anymore. Look, you and I are old enough to remember back in the days when, the news cycle and cable TV and, what was going to be on the front page and, was it in print yet or was it just on the internet, right? If it was just online, then it didn't matter as much, but if it made it to the front page of a printed newspaper,
Right.
then you were in
Yeah.
trouble. But
Above the
like
fold, front
above the
page,
fold,
right?
yeah. But like, you know, I mean, obviously we've seen the decline of news organizations. The Washington Post last week. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen there, but the Washington Post is an example where um, it's not what we used to look at anymore. And obviously, in Washington, people read the Post, but you talk about other news organizations and other entities. Like you said, if it's something that a client would do, and it's only going to be an Instagram story, well, okay, it's an Instagram story, but like who follows that person? Is it someone with 1.5 million followers, or is it somebody with, 15 followers in their basement? It doesn't really matter anymore, because if it gets picked up, it gets picked up, and it's not something, you talk about, whether it's Fortune 100 companies or, smaller companies or members of Congress. If they say something to a group of 10 people, it could be front page news the next day. Very often I tell clients to have as part of a crisis plan, and it's something that you hope you don't ever need, but it's something that, you should have a statement ready to go in like different circumstances that explains, let's say your controller steals money and runs away to the Cayman Islands. Like, you know, what is your statement to the press quickly? Because you might only have 20 minutes to get back to some reporter and say, hey, we're checking it out. We're figuring out what happened. We're sorry. He got fired, whatever it is, right?
Yeah. No, I'm thinking about now going to digital. I actually still get the Wall Street Journal in print. And some of it is like it's on auto renew on my
Every day.
credit card. It comes every day. I mean, the weekends there's only one issue. And I'll be honest, I feel bad sometimes that it's like it's a waste of paper. I do like the tactility of it, and I like that it's organized the way the editors intended it to be. That above, we're from that generation of like what's above the fold front page. That's where you start. And most of the time, I don't have the time to crack that open. I'm not bringing it on the train with me, and I am on the app, and that's where I'm reading most of it. The Times app, Newsday, I have Wall Street Journal, and I'm toggling, and I'll go in, and even if I try to find like what editorially they meant to be the biggest news, that was probably from the night before, and now there's a bigger one that is, it's like a feed on your app also. So even the way you consume that old media is different. There'll be times where I go in and I'm halfway through, and then I close the app out, and if I got to do something else, I'm like, I have to come back to that. And like by the time I realize I need to go dig for it, it's not there, or I don't have time to find it. And like I'm getting half a story that normally used to be normal, that I would just say, I'm just going to leave the paper open to this portion of the article.
Yeah.
I'm going to come back. So even someone like me who's trying to keep up with the news and is reading all the time, I'm like almost in a forced ADD mode with my media intake. So it's pretty wild. I feel like recently you mentioned Washington Post, and I know you're a big TV guy because we've talked before. I feel like there was a similar narrative on the fictional Washington Post in House of Cards. I feel like one of the big families like bought the paper, and they were trying to turn it into more of like, well, we don't know what Bezos is going to do exactly, but turn it into more of a quick social media hot take type of thing. I'll have to rewatch.
Yeah,
Because that was a while ago.
I mean, I don't know what his end game is there. I said to somebody the other day that Don Graham, who comes from the family that used to own the Washington Post, his mother was Catherine Graham. He commented on the firing of all the sports writers and said basically since the 1940s he's been reading the Washington Post with the sports section first, and now he doesn't know what to do. And my answer is, well, why did you sell Bezos the newspaper then? He shouldn't have. If he was so enamored with his family's organization, hang on to it. Yeah, I mean, look, well, Jeff Bezos gave him a lot of money for it, so he was happy to take it, and now he's sitting back in wherever he lives, and he's complaining about the sports section or lack thereof. But it's a bigger problem because it is it is systemic in terms of when I started out in government on campaigns and in business, there were I don't know 100 newspapers you could go to with a particular story, and now there are probably 10. Right? There were obviously the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal and whatever, but like even locally here in New York, you talk about clients in New York, there used to be, 6, 7, 8 daily tabloid publications that you could go to and say, hey, I have a client who's doing this thing, and could you write up a quick thing? And now, I call reporters who I know for 10 or 15 years, and they're like, I'm the only one in the newsroom and I'm writing about everything business related, or I'm writing about everything real estate related or whatever. And like, we have no ability to cover this. And besides the fact that obviously it's detrimental to client work, but it's not good for the communities that they serve. Uh, and obviously there are still exceptions here in New York. I think outside of New York City, you'd be hard pressed to find uh, local, hyper local publications that you can go to in, Pittsburgh or Philly or, wherever,
Yeah.
that you used to be able to get news about, oh, the Little League won their playoff game, or, there's a crime that's going on in this part of the town, or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And now that's just not getting covered, or, more apt to change the focus of news and dig into stuff. There's fewer and fewer investigative reporters out there, just because there are fewer and fewer outlets that will hire them. If there's a city councilman in Topeka, Kansas, that's stealing money out of whatever, nobody's going to find out about it because there's nobody reporting on that. There's nobody digging that up. And everybody, you talk about the Washington Post. I studied history in college, but I wrote for the paper at the University of Maryland. And I had a lot of friends who were aspiring journalists and people who went on to become journalists later. And we used to watch All the President's Men and that movie, The Paper, with Michael Keaton. You'd see that, and everybody like wanted to be, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, and dig up the truth and find out the next thing that was going to break, and hopefully make your career. But it's really the lack of those, investigative agencies that are gone.
I didn't really think about that. That's really interesting. It's as powerful as the web has become, and everybody has these supercomputers in their pockets now, basically, and you can in theory have all the information in the world at your fingertips. This is a blind spot, right? Because you pull it up and you expect to be able to find news about everything everywhere. You just pointed something out, is that if you don't have the investigative journalists out there with the outlet for it, but you're actually limited in a lot of ways.
And there's nobody doing that. There's nobody doing the 6-month investigation into, such and such a public official is being looked at for, fraud, waste, abuse, whatever it is. And it has to be out in the open. It has to be, I mean, I think some of it has shifted, just like news has shifted, where I think some of it, there's some aspiring influencer who's like, I'm going to be the next Bob Woodward, but for TikTok. And I'm sure that person is out there somewhere.
Right. And if they get a blue check, or maybe it's a gray check now or whatever.
But that's where I was going to say, is without the credibility of, I'm such and such a reporter from the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, even the New York Post. And, without that credibility behind it, whereas, who's going to pick up the phone and say, oh yeah, I'll tell you everything I know.
Yeah. What are your standards for publishing? I don't know.
Right.
Yeah. Whatever.
Do you have a legal and compliance department? No, of course not. Right.
My father-in-law, I'll call it. Yeah. Oh man, it's scary stuff. I mean, that kind of leads into one of the other questions I had, which is, and we sort of talked about one of them, but what trends in public affairs or strategic communications should leaders be paying close attention to right now? We kind of got into one of them, but what else outside of just like the way media has gone is a trend that you're seeing?
I mean, I think the personality of it, right? I think if you're the CEO of a real estate company and you don't, put out a video of you cooking your family dinner or going for a walk and thinking, the people who like, they go for a walk and they talk about, their thoughts on the news of the day or whatever, like people want to see genuine personalities out there, and not just cold statements of, our company did well this week. We had a good week because we bought such and such a thing, or whatever it is. We had a good quarter. Here's our earnings statement. Like, people care, obviously, but like the people, the 3 million people who are looking at your TikTok account or your Instagram account, they want to see the CEO or the CFO or the head of whatever talking about hey, I went to the beach with my kids today and here's a shell that we found, whatever it is. Like, there has to be a genuine um, affection for the person before they will make an investment in the public face of the company.
Right. And that's got to be really hard, I would imagine, for like I think millennials, Gen Zers that are coming up in the workforce and in starting businesses. It's a little more native to us, I guess, to overshare. Do you find that there's a divide if you have clients that are older, where it used to be you like early Gen X and older, where they're coming from that generation of no, what goes on at home is private, and you have to be a professional, and like I'm going to go to work in a suit, and nobody's going to see me in sweats or at the beach.
Yeah, and I mean, look, if it's client work or you're in house or you're working for a company that the CEO has that mentality, one of two things is going to happen. Either they're not going to be CEO because that's not the direction that the company wants to go in, or they're not going to do the thing that you suggested, and you have to work around that, right? If a client says to me, you know what, I don't really feel comfortable sharing pictures of my kids or, making a video in the bathroom, then we'll do something else, right? And we'll come up with something that the messaging is the same, but the environment and the situation that they're in for a video or for a statement or for whatever, that's got to change because, you have to kind of adjust to where they are and you can't always bring them to what you're thinking.
And are you seeing that with politicians also? I'm trying to think in terms of like campaign ads, or just like spot pieces. Are they trying to bring their personal life into it a little bit more?
I mean, look, we don't have to debate this person here either, but I think somebody who is successful because of his social media presence is the mayor.
I thought you were going to say the president, but the mayor,
President too.
he's the more relevant local example.
Well, President Trump is honest and open, but in writing, right? I could never see Donald Trump making a video of himself like, making coffee in the morning because he probably doesn't, but or opening a can of Diet Coke and having a walk and talk with you about whatever he's thinking, right? He'll just put out a, 480-page statement on Truth Social and hope that you read it.
All caps.
Right.
Thank you for your attention to this.
But, Mamdani, I mean, his social media presence and his natural ability, I think is a lot of the reason why he became mayor. A lot of the reason why he won that primary.
And he has. I mean, I don't know him personally. I'm just judging based on what I see. Like he seems like he's got all the right instincts for that. Because Trump had the advantage of everybody knew who he was. I don't know. I guess since the early '80s, and his father was a public figure in some sense. So he kind of came into it as he didn't have to try very hard. I mean, did anybody know who Mamdani really was a year and a half ago? Even New Yorkers? Yeah. No, so it's you talk about meteoric rises.
But you compare him right to Andrew Cuomo, who, a month before the primary, everyone thought was a lock to win that primary. Governor Cuomo is 68 or whatever. You talk about a differential in personalities and styles based on age and generational disparities. Andrew Cuomo, I've seen his videos. He doesn't seem like he means what he says when he says it out loud. And like him or not, Mamdani is a good, he's good on his feet and he's good on the screen and he seems genuine. I don't know what's in his head, but Cuomo, who I'm sure, most of your listeners would have preferred to have won that primary. He just, he comes from a different generation and a different universe of, look, he was in his 20s when his father was governor and he just doesn't play in that world well of like, we have to be authentic, but we're really faking it.
That's actually if I had to put a face to what I was talking about before, with an older generation, I can't picture him without the not just suit, but like power suit, with the button and everything hair just so and coiffed. Maybe during COVID, I think he had the quarter zip and he was in like, battle mode. But most of the time it's just buttoned up and it seems to me that like the scandals that kind of rocked his campaign and his governorship, that was just almost like his personal life bled through too quickly and too much. Like it's almost, I mean, we're not going to get into like the morality of it, but it was sort of a shock, not just what he was accused of, but like, wait, he's not just the guy in the suit that's up in front of the mic and like leading the charge and it's all business. You know, it was like you almost couldn't picture him in any other mode.
Right. Which at this point, like we were saying, is not helpful if you want to be, you know, if you want to get into elected office in 2026 and beyond, you have to be good at that, right? It's like, you know, in 1960 when it was Kennedy and Nixon, and they said, you know, Kennedy won because he's better on TV. Well, now the new TV is TikTok and Instagram and YouTube, and you know, you have to master those and come off as authentically as you can without seeming like you're faking the authenticity.
So we don't like to go too long with these, but I guess the last question that we can kind of end off on is, do you have a lesson from your career that you'd wish you'd learned earlier, or even just something that's like been immensely inspiring to you?
Yeah, so I think you know, obviously I mentioned I worked in government, and I was always more political than policy. Um, I dabbled in policy, but I was never like the policy guy on education or homeland security or whatever. And I kind of, I got to a point where I had my hand in a variety of different policy areas, but I was never like the expert on whatever. And I would say to people listening who are coming up now, become an expert in something, become the guy that people go to or the woman that people go to on policy as related to, you know, if you want to work in government, obviously it's different, but if, you know, become the education, if you're interested in education, become the education go to for your principal, for your person, for your organization. And then take that and translate it down the road because it, you know, in a career spanning 10, 20, 30, 40, 60 years, if you can kind of pull at that thread over time, it will better serve you in terms of what you can do. And, you know, you won't be stuck with that, but you'll be able to be that person throughout, as opposed to like knowing a little bit about a lot of things, right? Know a lot about one thing or two things.
Go deep, not wide. Yeah, no, that's great advice. Awesome. Well, Ross, how can people find you?
So, Twitter, which I don't use as much as I used to. Instagram, it's Wall2Wall Communications. Wall2WallCommunications.com. And that's it.
Sounds good. All right, Ross. Well, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
This is great.
Thank you.
For more on all things real estate and the law, subscribe to this and our other podcasts. Follow Bergstein, Flynn, Knowlton, and Polina on social media. Subscribe to our newsletter and go to bfklawoffice.com. That's bfklawoffice.com to learn more.